Welcome to AP Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Al Pilong, CEO of AP Leadership Partners, an executive coaching practice centered around a passion for effective leadership. There are two things I know for sure about leadership. First, leadership is hard. And second, leadership matters. And so my hope today is that through the course of this conversation, you will find fresh ideas and inspiration for your challenging but important leadership journey ahead. Thanks for listening. The AP Leadership Podcast is sponsored by CXO Coaching, an executive coaching firm focused on empowering leaders and driving results. And now, let's get started. Our guest today is someone who has spent nearly 25 years building his career at one of the most respected health systems in the country, Houston Methodist. He came up through the CEO role at Houston Methodist Sugarland and eventually expanded his leadership responsibility across multiple hospitals in the network, and today serves as the Executive Vice President of Network Hospitals for the entire Houston Methodist system. I'm really pleased to welcome Chris Siebenaler to the podcast. Chris, welcome. It's good to have you here.
Well, hello, Al. It's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So before we jump into the questions on leadership, I wondered if you could go back and have a conversation with the version of Chris who was just starting out, if you can remember that far. What's the one thing you'd tell that younger version of yourself?
Gosh, I think I would tell myself that it's okay not to have all the answers, that it's okay if you mess up, because trust me, the people that you're working with, they've messed up, they've failed and succeeded and then failed again. There's an element early on in your career where you're trying to get it right or not try to do things wrong. There's kind of both of those two equations. And in reality, if I could go back and ask more questions along the way, some of the learnings that just happen as a result of experience, maybe I would have learned those earlier on.
When we think about what we would say to our younger selves, we're really talking about the wisdom that comes from experience. We're talking about patterns we've seen, the lessons we've lived, the things that we've enjoyed from a success standpoint, as well as the failures that we've all experienced along the way. So that brings me to the first question. In your experience, and with all of your years at Houston Methodist, why, in your view, do leaders succeed?
Let me talk about what I envision as an effective leader. An effective leader brings people up around them and helps everyone around them to succeed. To me, that's what being a successful leader is. You and I, we've worked in healthcare longer than we probably care to share in this podcast. I'm guessing it's probably combined more than 60 years at this point.
I think you're right.
A bit generous to ourselves here. Because,
Yes.
1990 was my first hospital job. So yeah, dating myself a tad. But when I think about it, it goes back to my first answer, Al. You don't have to have all the answers. As a matter of fact, if you think you have all the answers, you're kind of starting out with one hand kind of tied behind your back. The reality is we don't know the answers to everything. And the best way for us to create a high-performing team is to make sure that we hear from everyone around us, make sure we're transparent, we're building trust. And ultimately, what happens out of all that is that we have a high-performing team, and that high-performing team ultimately is a measure of success, of a successful leader.
Yeah, for sure. We've both seen a lot and been around the block a bit, but I know you, and I know you're continuing to learn and grow as a person, as a leader. What's your aspiration from a leadership perspective?
This is a journey. We never figure it out.
Yeah.
We're constantly evolving. And from my standpoint, it starts from a position of service. What drives me is the team doing well. If you look at every personality assessment I've ever done, it says you derive great satisfaction from the team doing well. And so if the team does well, then I feel like I'm doing well. So from my standpoint, you have to be a good learner and you have to be able to serve those around you. And so kind of fundamentally, I would say, servant leadership is probably the core for me.
So let's jump to that. Talk a little bit more about servant leadership. In your view, when you think about servant leadership, how does that practically play out for you?
I think it's in the behaviors every day. We've spent a lot of time as an organization, as a team, really focusing in on, well, what are those behaviors? What behaviors should we see from each other? How is that demonstrated where the work is done? So when I'm walking from point A to point B, what am I doing? Who am I talking to? What things am I noticing? One of our service standards at Houston Methodist is, heads up, phone down.
Like
And that is
that.
one of those things that, despite it being one of our service standards, the temptation is so great to look at your phone. And frankly, it's like the first thing you want to do when you get into an elevator. I see everyone grabs their phone because, boy, they've missed something in the past 30 seconds watching.
Yeah.
So I think it starts even with just, how do you walk around where you were? Who do you engage? How do you engage them? My attitude is, you stop, you have conversation, you find moments to engage in personal conversation. If you've worked in that location for a period of time, you talk about family, you talk about friends, you talk about vacations, but you do that in the unit. You do that, where they conduct their huddles. You do that at the nurses station, and you do it in an intentional way. You go to where people are, you engage in conversation, and you support them in the work that they do, because their work is meaningful. I mean, ultimately, at Houston Methodist, we have 36,000 or so employees. I look at that in a couple of different ways. I look at that as, well, we have 36,000 difference makers. We have 36,000 problem solvers.
Yes.
We have 36,000 innovators.
Yeah.
And the only way that we're going to find that information out is if we go to where they are and we engage with them.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned a service standard, heads up, phones down. What other specific behaviors are you encouraging your team or are you modeling as a leader?
Listen first, talk later. Healthcare has a lot of experts, right? And so people who are super well educated, super smart, and bring a lot to the table in every discussion. Occasionally things can become well, let me tell you what I think, because I'm the expert in fill in the blank. And in reality, everybody can provide something to that conversation. Yeah. Do you mind if I tell a quick story?
Please.
We engage frontline staff, and I'll never forget, one of our MRI leads at one of our hospitals was in a room, part of a group, reporting out to the executive team. And I noticed the MRI lead. In a break in the action, I looked over at him and I said, what are your thoughts? And he said, well, if someone had asked us what type of MRI we needed, we might have told you, don't buy another 3T magnet. We need another 1.5. And here are the reasons why. He felt the need to say, you have to get feedback from your front line, because it's not that you wasted your money. It's that we have so many patients with implants. When they come in and they have an MRI, we need to have the right magnet. And I'll never forget that. And I've used this story a bunch of times, Al, because it's such a great lesson that we in leadership think we have all the answers to these things, and we absolutely don't. Or they don't.
Yeah, the idea of listening first. And I've been to your campus, I've been to your hospitals with you, and just observed that process that you're talking about, where you bring frontline staff in, and what a empowering, sort of validating, caring, respectful thing for you to do for the team who is closest to the work, right? That are doing the work every day, to get their feedback and input on how to make things better, as opposed to you sitting in a conference room with the rest of the C-suite and making stuff up. And then what happens? You buy the wrong magnet. You could have just asked.
I love making stuff up. Yeah, unfortunately, that's probably pretty darn accurate sometimes.
I'm talking about myself. You would never do that.
Wow, yeah. Well, I've never done that.
Yeah. Well, very good. All right. So, standard work, behaviors every day, being consistent and being where people are is all part of what it means to be a servant. And that's embedded in your DNA, it sounds like. And it looks like you're trying to embed it more and more in the DNA of your team.
Yeah. And we have to be comfortable talking to each other about this stuff. We rush to solutions before understanding what the problem is. And so we solve part of the problem, but we really don't solve the full problem. And kind of what drove me to want to engage in a lean type of operating model was this whole concept around, I am just tired of solving the same darn problems over and over again.
Yeah. So what's some of the most important leadership advice that you've received or that you follow as a leader?
People have told me there's a lot of things you could do. You should really be very thoughtful about the things you should do. So learn how to prioritize your work. And the best way to prioritize your work is to first ensure that there's alignment in terms of the work that you're doing or leading and the organization. I have a good friend and former colleague who used to tell me, Houston Methodist, we are a full plate company. And we are always willing to put another scoop of whatever onto that plate. What I've been really, really focused on these last several years is let's make sure we plan out our work and work our plan, because someone will throw something onto that plate that might distract us. And we have to be disciplined enough to kind of go, okay, I'm going to push that to the edge of the plate and not worry about it. There's a lot of value in just simplifying our decision-making process. Now, how we problem solve, I think we should be very diligent about how we think through problems, because the problems in healthcare are quite complex. I wish it weren't so, but it is. Our focus as an organization, appropriately so, is to keep the patient at the center of everything we do. But it's not just keep the patient at the center of everything we do. It's keep people at the center of everything we do, because we don't want it to not be a great place to work, right? We want great care and we want a great place to work.
Yeah.
And all the moments throughout the day that build up to that. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah. I do think it's important to highlight what you're saying here about prioritizing your work. Every day is a new crisis. Every day is a new opportunity. Every day is a new challenge. But we make a plan and then something new comes up. And it's important. It's a new reg. It's a new change. It's in response to a major event that has occurred in one of your facilities. And you don't have the luxury of ignoring it. You have to take it on. But the key thing is that I found was so hard as an executive was, what are we going to take off the plate if we're going to put that one on? And so don't just keep, as you said, I love it, scoop another scoop on or whatever it is you said. But all right, so if you're going to put another scoop on, what's going to come off? Is that something that you guys have focused on, or how do you do that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big fan of leadership standard work, literally just writing out the things I'm going to do, put it into an Excel file and carry that around with me. I require that all leaders within the network have their standard work and they work through those things. Those things can be daily, they can be weekly, they can be monthly, they can be twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever might happen to be.
So for the audience, these are the habits, the activities that you're committed to, that are important, that you're going to track to make sure they happen in whatever cadence you've committed to making them happen.
Absolutely. What I found and what I continue to find is that I will work my way through that standard work. And I will find that I don't do all of the things I said were important enough for me to put on some document that I carry around with me throughout the day and write notes on, that I don't get to all that work. I created a column on that leadership standard work that said, what are the distractions and roadblocks? And what I found was some of the same things were getting in the way of the things that I wanted to do. It's all levels of the organization distracting you from those things that, if done right, will help you execute on those things way up here that you say you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books I've read and I've reread is Atomic Habits, and just the concept of personally, what things am I going to be doing every day that if you do it and you stack them on top of each other, those improvements ultimately lead to something much better. I wasn't a fan when he was coaching, but Nick Saban, I've gone back and over the years, I've looked at his videos and he repeatedly said, outcomes are a distraction. We didn't talk about winning NCAA championships. We focused on getting that play right and getting it right over and over and over again, because if we did that right in the moment, and we did that consistently throughout the year, we might have a better chance of even putting ourselves in a position. If we as leaders continue to do the same things kind of over and over again, and we build capabilities within that team will help the organization to be successful.
You got to do the right things, the little things every day, and then observe what's getting in the way of the important. Like the things that are critical for us to be accomplishing every day, every week, every month, what's blocking that? And then let's clear those out of the way. And that's the role of a leader. Get rid of the extraneous and do the essential and do it consistently. And that leads you ultimately to excellence. Okay. What are some of the hard leadership decisions that often need to be made that employees may not understand or be happy with?
What I find challenging is when people don't understand the why. Why would we even do that? Being transparent about the things that we do about what we're focused on as an organization, I think is a key component. It helps the why become more understandable. But if people understand the why, they're just not going to do it. I think they will do what they think they need to do, and then when you're not looking, they're not going to do it because it's just important. You and I in the room together at one of our hospitals, we heard a unit secretary and PCA, a patient care associate, talk about getting the patient's correct weight. I don't know if you remember the conversation.
I do remember that very clearly.
But I remember her talking about this, and she was embarrassed to admit in front of you and me that she didn't actually always get the right weight because she really didn't think it was all that important. But when she worked on a team with the nutritionists who tried to explain why this is so important, the dietitians, the pharmacists, et cetera, she realized, I have to get the right weight. This is like super important. And I don't consider her to be a quote unquote bad employee, Al. She's a good employee, but she didn't understand the why. Now I know that's really maybe oversimplified, but take that personal experience and explode it up to an organization level. And so explaining the why is the challenging part of that because we all have to change, right? It's not just one of us, it's every one of us has to change. So to me, I think that's the hardest part is helping people understand the why. And that's, again, I'll go back to transparency. The more we can be transparent about what it is we're trying to accomplish, how we're going to get that done, how we're going to measure success, et cetera, the more people are going to connect to the why. And if they know that the work that they do connects to something greater than self, they'll be even better at understanding what the why is.
No, I think that's really important, understanding the why and being as transparent as you possibly can. I think that just demonstrates respect for your team and for your people. And when people feel respected, when they're communicated to clearly, even if they don't agree, or even if they think, well, I wouldn't do that, at least they understand where you're coming from, why it's happening, and what the rationale is or is going to be. So yeah, I really appreciate that context. So as we wrap up here, maybe one thought that you want to leave with the audience around leadership?
Oh, gosh, be better. Be willing to be better tomorrow. There's this concept of just incremental improvement. And I remember when my son, who was a competitive golfer, and he was visiting college campuses, and I remember a super well-accomplished junior and collegiate golfer who was the assistant coach at this program that we visited. And as I was walking around, listening into the conversation between this gentleman and my son, and my wife was there, of course, as well, I asked him a question around getting better and how does getting better impact who travels with the team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he just shook his head and he said, if I could have gotten a little bit better, I would be on one of the tours today. And in reality, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to make it to those tours. And so my attitude around improvement is we got to get a little bit better tomorrow. And he put his fingers together like this, and you almost couldn't see any space between his fingers. But his whole attitude was, we just have to get a little bit better tomorrow. I think one of the biggest challenges that leaders can face is complacency and staying with the status quo, when in reality, status quo is really not the approach we should be taking. It's not, doing things for the sake of doing them. It's not false urgency. It's really about, okay, there's a person at the other end of every single thing we do. Could be a patient, could be a family member, could be a colleague, coworker. There's a person that depends on me, someone doing their job. And so shouldn't I do it a little bit better tomorrow? Shouldn't I be willing to say, hey, could we do better at that? To me, that's one of the hardest things to do. And frankly, I think it's a hard thing to do at a high performing organization like Houston Methodist is, so how do we get a little bit better?
Yeah.
Because it matters. That's kind of how I look at it. I think if I were to leave you with one thing, I would say, let's figure out how we get better and what we should be getting better at. Because at the end of the day, someone is depending on us for that.
Yeah. Love that idea of just a little bit better, incremental improvement every day. Hard thing to sustain. Sometimes we can get comfortable and we want to be comfortable. But I think when you frame it the way you did, which is there's a patient or there's a colleague or there's a process or there's an outcome that what I'm doing impacts, then it becomes less about me and more about the bigger picture. And that's a beautiful thing. And when everyone 36,000 at Houston Methodist can sort of be linked together to get a little bit better every day, that's a big improvement. And that's powerful and that's impactful. So, yeah.
How many stories can you remember from your past that were so incredible, so meaningful, the difference that someone made
in
the team on someone else's life? To me, those are the things that all I need to hear is a few of those every so often to fill my bucket up, because it kind of makes it all worthwhile. The hard work, the long hours, that's just our environment. We're a 24/7 operation in healthcare.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It matters.
Well, Chris, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for your insights. Really have appreciated it, and look forward to continuing to watch you grow and do great things there at Houston Methodist.
I enjoy the friendship, Al, and enjoy the partnership as well. And certainly look forward to learning from you in the future.
All right. Very good. Well, thanks, Chris.
All right. Take care, sir.
Yep. Thanks for listening. Leadership is rarely simple and it's rarely easy. And that's exactly why it matters. My hope is that something from today's conversation gave you a moment to pause, reflect, or see your leadership in a new way. Until next time, lead well.